Yeah, so we're really happy to have Karen Kessler and C.d. Moland here this month. And as you can see, they have all sorts of beautiful and magical works. Karen has the paintings, the lino cuts, and the quilts, and C.d. has the felt work. So yeah, without further ado, uh, let's get started with Karen Kessler.
It's just great to have been asked to do the show with C.d. and the gallery has been so supportive. They did an awesome job hanging everything. And thanks you guys for coming. Talking about my method. Anytime if you have any questions, let me know because I tend to ramble if I get nervous. So I have to say the fabric work in my life came first. There was always fabric around when I was a kid. I don't remember buying sketchbooks until I was in high school, but there was always some fabric to sew. And so the quilts are some of what I can't keep from doing. The fabric work I have in here is I think of it as pretty traditional. I did a lot of my um, design work when I was at Clark College in fabric, and it was a little bit wilder. But I, as far as education goes, since I went to school in Vancouver, we always had art. We had art from kindergarten all the way through high school. You had to choose it in high school, but you still had it. So I kind of went for that. Graduated from high school, went to a ceramics foundation in Montana for a while, then came back. And by then I already had a child. I'd gotten married before we went away to ceramic school, had a child, came back. Then, then a lot of options were closed. So I went to Clark College, ended up, because I went to Clark, I got to work in graphics at Clark, and I got to work in graphics at the library system. And it's really a whole lot easier to find a way to make some money doing art when you're doing graphics. So I did that. And it turned into, and that was graphics by hand. That was just only the beginning was of computer graphics. Sometimes we would do these awesome, you know, kind of abstract designs on our computers, and then we'd have to take a picture of it and get it developed because nobody had a printer in those days. So about the time my printers were coming, Photoshop and all that was happening, I went back to Marylhurst to get my fine art degree. And because I was doing graphics, then I started to do the linoleum block prints, where I actually did my thesis work in etching on zinc. But I haven't done too much of that lately just because I really like messy medias. I like messy medias the best. But zinc and nitrous acid and all that, it just gets a little too messy unless I'm really in the mood to get a whole series going. So I do the block prints, and the painting was kind of an afterthought as I was finishing college. I did first year painting in my senior year of college when I was doing my thesis work with the printmaking. So from there, I went to editioning other printmakers' prints, which means that you just go into their studio and you do all the grunt work of getting all the prints made. They've already made the plate. You know what they want it to look like. You go in and you have to be their tool and make their prints look like what they want them to look like, not what you want them to look like. Which I was used to that. That's what graphics is about too. You have to make things other people want. So I don't know, where did I go from there? Oh yeah, I got sidetracked. I thought it'd be a really good idea to have something a little more lucrative. So I chose shiatsu, which is a Japanese style massage, which, so then I had 2 full-time jobs that weren't very lucrative. And that went on for about 26 years. And then I retired a few years ago and finally have more time, way more time, which is very strange when you worked full time for 50 years straight and all of a sudden you have time, and it's more stressful than you would think. I mean, some of you young people just have no idea how hard it is going to be to be retired. And I'm just kidding. But so most of the work that's in here I have done since I retired, and I tried to have a time space. I didn't want to go back and show stuff from, years ago, but before the earth got round. But anyway, let's see. My husband is here for moral support, so you can let me know if I'm forgetting anything.
I have a question.
Okay.
A number of people have asked me what Chine
Okay. Okay. Chine collé is most of the coloring on the lino block prints that you see. It's done with Chine collé, which means it's paper that's glued on. And there is a little bit of watercolor in my prints, but most of the color is paper. So when you carve the plates, here I'm gonna pass a couple plates around so you can kind of see what the plate looks like. So that's linoleum, and you carve out your design, and then the surface that you can feel on the top, you're going to roll it with the roller so the ink only stays on the top, which is the opposite of some kinds of printmaking where you gumbo the ink in and you wipe off the top. But this is called relief printing when it's linoleum block. So you roll the ink on, and then you have paper. Now the paper has to fit the block, of course. So before I started printing, I had pieces of paper cut out. And I brought this box of paper so you can kind of have an idea of how many choices of colors you could add in to your prints. So it's kind of like quilting. If you have a bad habit of collecting a lot of fancy fabric, you can have a bad habit of collecting a lot of fancy paper too. And so after the plate is inked, we're getting to the answer to the question. Chine, I believe, means paper in French. Collé means color. Now I could use the term, and sometimes I do use the term collage, but that connotates that I'm cutting images that are made in some other media and gluing them in. And it's kind of not what I'm doing. So Chine collé is more the correct term. So it basically means that it's colored paper. And so after the plate is inked, then we take these pieces of paper, ink the back of them, and lay them very carefully over the inked plate. And then you're going to put the backing paper over everything. Pull the blankets to the press over, get the press going, let it roll through, and when it comes out, the ink has transferred to the paper, but the colored paper has also been pressed with glue onto the backing paper. So once you get to that part, it's just the piece of magic that all the work that led up to it happens in. You can't tell it by looking in here, but on my website, some of the prints I have, all the several different colors. And I've kind of, after having auditioned for other printers for years, I'm kind of learning not to think of trying to make an edition that all look the same. I kind of want, sometimes there'll be some colors that work really good and I might do a couple of them. But I do really small editions, and I do some to begin with, and then I decide how many is going to be in the edition. There was a time when I always did about 25. Now I do like between 6 and 12. I'm just, usually want to move on to the next thing. So, and there's always the one where you wish that you had made an edition of 50 because everybody wants that one. But, but you don't get to change your mind. I mean, not that the printing police would probably be looking very close, but it's just not fair to your buyers to do that. So, and I just brought these just for the heck of it so you can kind of see the cutting tools. There's a lot of choices of, they're kind of U-shaped, and they'll, different sizes of cuts. But, and then I have to, I guess, talking about my subjects, the dance theme has run through my work for a really long time, and I almost always do figurative. If I said I always did figurative, then I would want to do a landscape tomorrow. But, but yeah, I almost always do figurative work, and I like to do work when people are moving, and I kind of avoid work where people are posing. So, not that that never happens either. There's nothing that never happens with art. But so when I did the series, it's mostly on the other side here. I purposely wanted to do some work that was not dancing, just to see if I could challenge myself to the edge a little bit. And so there's about 5 pieces that are about people and their pets, and thinking about like a familiar, they call the witch's black cat a familiar. They work together. They advise each other. So I was thinking about that, and we watched that goofy long show called His Magical Materials. I don't know if any of you have seen that. Everybody from this one universe has a familiar, and that just made me think even more about it. I think there's some banty chickens in the parakeet, and I didn't get yet to more traditional dogs. I mean, how would you choose which dog? Everybody has their favorite dog. So there are some cats. That's another thing I haven't talked about is monotypes. Monotypes are like a cross between printing and painting. So you're basically painting on a printing plate, like a plexiglass plate, and you could sketch on it, and then you can add ink. You can add ink and then wipe away ink to draw, kind of reverse draw. You can add Chine collé. You can do whatever you want to do to get ink on the plastic plate that's going to be transferred to the paper when it goes through the press. So in the back, there's a little series of cats that are monotypes, and it's kind of a magical process to use because it can be fairly fast, and when you think you got what you want on the plate and it goes through the press and comes out the other end, it's kind of like, well, that's not what I said. That's what you thought I said, but what I really said was, and then you get to go back onto the plate, do some more color, add some more lines, whatever you want, and you could just keep this process up of drawing on the plate. Of course, you have to register what you already have on the paper onto the next plate, put it through again, and eventually you will usually get something you want. You don't always get something you want. Everybody that makes art knows that you don't always get what you want, but if you don't get what you want, you get some ideas of how to start the next one. So that's kind of how monotyping goes. And there's there's just a whole almost community of people that like to monotype, and thousands of ways to monotype. And, painting on, you can use what they call viscosity printing, where you have different colors of ink and they're different levels of oiliness, and they'll repel or attract each other. And so when you ink the plate, if you ink it first with a really stiff ink, then when you ink over it again with a really loose ink, it'll pick up some of that stiff ink and put some loose ink down where there's some space. And it can be a really, really fun thing to do, especially if you're in the studio with everybody having a monotype party, which can be really fun. So,
where does your interest in animals come from? Do you do a lot?
no, I don't do a lot with animals, but we have cats. So I do cats, and I've done a whole series of crows in the past. And they were another thing that move around. And since I like to try to do things that move, especially the crows, you catch them mid-hop. Yeah, I think that's what I like about them, is they move. Yeah. I have taken a lot of just bad photographs of people moving if I'm somewhere dancing, which doesn't really happen that much anymore. But I have a lot of collection of pictures of people moving. Sometimes I know them, but also I just collect images of people dancing, draw off the computer, try to freeze people in space. I did get a bunch of pictures of people dancing over. I don't know if any of you go to Laurel Thirst, but there's a fiddler I like to go listen to with a friend, and James Mason, and wherever he goes, everybody's dancing. And so I have a bunch of pictures of them, but I haven't put them into a painting yet. I intend to. So I think people should try to dance, even if it's just in their kitchen while they're cooking. So
do I assume you work with photographs?
Yeah, photographs. Yeah, and they're never doing exactly what you want them to do. So you got to stand in front of the mirror and do that thing. Oh yeah, okay. So yeah. Like this one I started this painting about 10 years ago, and it was totally different colors. And then about 5 years ago, I did the whole painting over, and it was still totally different colors. And then this one I did the last time through was, I don't know, I finally got it how I wanted it. I didn't think that was going to happen, but it did. So it felt really good to get it up. And I was trying to play with that flickering of color that reminds me of the little mirror balls that go around and flash colors on it. Okay, yeah, I mostly paint with brushes, and but I do some palette knife work. I do some scratching into the paint when it's, try to get it real thick and full, and then scratch into it. I'm one of those real slow learners when it comes to technology, but I've figured out how to follow people on Instagram that do really interesting things. I didn't really think that was something that I wasn't expecting it to work out that way, but the people do their little reels they do a little paint thing, and it's like, oh, really? That's so I'm kind of looking forward to starting some new paintings and see if I could push my techniques a little bit and try some different ways to manipulate paint.
Will your subject change?
You know, there'll be a lot of dancing, but that doesn't mean there won't be some other things. I got the one little painting of the violins. That's my youngest granddaughter has become really interested in the fiddle, so I think there'll be some more fiddle pictures in our future. And I've been playing, like this was the last one I did, and I was playing with light. And I have another one started at home where the light's coming from a campfire. So I don't know where that idea will go, but I don't think I'm done with it yet. The idea, not the painting. The painting's done. But sometimes I think a painting's done and it ends up back on an easel. All right.
Introducing C.d. Moland.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the gallery as well for this chance to share my work. It's really been exciting and I really appreciate the opportunity. So wool is made up from the fur of sheep, and it's actually the oldest known fiber. They think originally that it was created by the nomadic tribes in Asia that used fleece to line their sandals, and eventually from the heat and pressure from them wearing them in their sandals, it would felt together. The oldest known samples date back to the Bronze and Iron Ages, but it was probably created long before that. And it's been used for everything ever since. Clothing, tents, hats, blankets, almost anything you can imagine. And fast forward to today, and most of our wool comes from domesticated sheep. There's very few wild sheep anymore, just in remote areas. And wild sheep will actually shed their own fleece, but domesticated sheep can't. So they need to be sheared once a year for health reasons. They have a lot of health problems if they aren't shorn at least once a year. And there's basically 3 types of wool, and it's graded according to microns. Like the finest wool is merino wool, and it runs from 17 to 22 microns. Then there's a medium wool, and then there's what's called strong wool, and it's very coarse and dense. And the breeds of sheep that the strong wool comes from are super hardy. They live in very arid, dry areas that most animals wouldn't be able to survive in. There's a lot of them in southern Australia. And the wool is so tough that originally they used it mostly for carpets and rugs. It was too dense and hard to be used for clothing. But it's kind of fallen out of favor because they've gone to mostly synthetic fibers for those things instead of wool. So there's a ton of strong wool sitting in New Zealand and Australia. So a company called Sheer Edge, which sounds like a hairdresser, but it's not. They have come up with a method to chop up that wool. Then they mix it with an acid from cornstarch, and they end up with pellets that they are using to build boats and make knives and fencing. And basically they're coming up with a substitute for plastic that's naturally sourced. So that's a really cool thing. Okay, what I do here is mostly, there's a lot of different types of felting, but I do mostly wet felting and needle felting. And what happens with felting is that the fiber on the hair of sheep has little tiny microscopic scales all over it. And when it's felted, like each hair, the scales kind of lay like this. It's like the closed pine cone. They all lay in one direction. And what happens when it's felted, when water and heat hit it, it kind of opens up the scales. So it's like this. And then the scales mesh together with agitation. So this is what happens when you shrunk a sweater in the wash machine.
Right.
And once these fibers are knitted, they aren't going to come apart again. You've got to give away that sweater to somebody a lot smaller than you, because it's not going to come apart again. And if anybody's wondering, like I did, because this is the kind of rabbit hole my brain goes down, the reason why wool doesn't actually felt on the sheep, because they stand out in the rain and the hot sun, they're exposed to all that. Well, the scales are laying like this on their wool, and they also secrete lanolin, which this is what lanolin comes from. It's a byproduct of processing the wool. They secrete lanolin that keeps those scales all going in the same direction. So wool won't actually felt until that lanolin is processed out of it. Okay, needle felting is a newer method of felting that's a little different. It's used a barbed needle, and it presses down the fibers and knits them together by punching it with a little needle. And you might have seen little needle felted animals that are really cute. Yeah, and some of them are super realistic. I've seen it on Instagram where they're poking these little animals, and you just want, oh, stop that. You're poking that little animal. It's so mean. But so that's needle felting. Okay, so some of the supplies that I use, basically a lot of it is merino, which I just dropped. And rather than pass it around, maybe I'll just leave it up here and you can come up and feel it when you're done. This is merino. It comes in a bunch of different colors. I buy a lot of it on Etsy. A lot of it comes from Australia or the UK. There's not much in the way of processing wool here in the United States anymore. There's a book called Vanishing Fleece, if anybody's interested. It follows the wool when it's shorn off the sheep until it's processed into yarn, which doesn't sound that interesting, but actually it is really interesting. And it talks a lot about what has happened to the wool industry in the United States and how they're trying to rebuild it. So this is merino. I use some other wools, although not like this is curly locks. It's a not as fine, but it has its uses to create different effects. I use a lot of silks. Like this is silk lap, which comes in layers, and you can peel apart the layers for different effects. There's like silk noel. There's mulberry silk, which is very fine silk, and silk yarns and threads. You can actually take apart like silk scarves and use the threads from that. There's also natural fibers, like this is a banana fiber, and it looks and feels like silk, but it's actually made from the banana peel. There's also flax, which is more like comes from the flax plant, and this is Tulsa silk. And there's also synthetic fibers that you can use. There's Vicros that looks a lot like silk as well. There's Angelina, which sparkles, adds a sparkle effect. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can use, and I use a lot of yarns. Almost everything that you can think of can be wet felted. A lot of them don't actually wet felt, but you use the wool to bind them into the fiber by layering it. I also use a lot of printed fabric just for texture, depth, and that kind of thing. So the process is, usually I start with pre-felt. You can arrange the wool in layers and make a base. That's kind of time consuming, and so I tend to use pre-felt. And this is wool that has been semi-felted. You don't want to use the felt that comes from the craft store because that's completely felted and the wool won't attach to it. Yeah, yeah, it's not going anywhere. But this is just semi-felted. I think quilt batting is actually completely felted, or else when you went to wash it, it would kind of lump up.
This is semi
Yeah, it's called pre-felt.
pre.
And a lot of times you have to order it online. There's not too many stores here locally that would carry it.
Right.
But it's easy to get on Etsy. And then I lay it out. This is a bamboo. I usually use bamboo or as a rolling agent. Some people use bubble wrap. I kind of prefer this. I lay it out on this. On landscapes, I usually work from the sky down. On others, I work from the background forward and just layer the objects on top of each other. That way you can move them around at any time.
Is this the size of the piece? Or is this a process creative?
This, like what the pre-felt will be your size. Although it might shrink a bit.
Is a size
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wood originally started as this size.
That's the piece. Okay.
Yeah. And after you've gotten it all laid out, you cover it with mesh to keep the fibers from moving around. And then you wet it with hot water. I use this, although like you could use a spray bottle. You just want to kind of try to get the water evenly applied to the whole piece.
Hot? Or
Hot.
Hot.
As hot as you can stand.
How do you-
And then I use this on top of the knitting. It's a washboard. I keep using this until I know it's pretty much flattened together. And at that point, you roll up the bamboo. You roll the thing in the bamboo and then you keep rolling it on the table to finish the felting process. And I usually do it like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then I open it up, I turn the piece a quarter, and then do it again, and you do that 4 times.
Turn a corner means go.
Yep.
Good.
Mm-hmm. So it's all done. The felt that's in the middle of it will actually have more pressure on it than the outsides. So that will tend to felt more, and you want to keep it even, so you keep turning it. And after that, you rinse it all out, rinse all the soap out, and let it dry. And depending on your weather, it can take from a couple hours to a whole day for it to dry completely. And after that is the needle felting process.
How do you let it dry? Do you stretch it? Do you set it? Do you
I have a air purifier, and then I have a styrofoam that's from, I think, a microwave or something that I set over it. And then I put it on bamboo like this so air can circulate it under it.
like hanging it?
I don't hang it, I just leave it flat.
Weird.
Yeah. But you can just set it on a table. I think the air circulating lets it dry a little faster, but you can set it out on the table and it will dry as well. And then these are needle felting needles. I usually do needle felting to kind of add definition to areas. And I can also add elements in if I decide it needs something more. These are little barbed needles. You don't want to stick yourself with it because it's going to hurt pulling it out, kind of like porcupines. Yeah, it's basically a porcupine needle. And then after I have it needle felted, then I go to machine stitching, and that also adds definition or shading. And then on some of them, I've added some hand embroidery. A lot of times that's really effective in vegetation landscapes. It kind of adds a neat element. Is there any questions on the felting process?
Yeah, and for me, I have a little question. So I love the dog with the waves.
Mhm.
So is that a last minute needle felting? How do you do the light? Yeah, how do you get light? Well,
Okay, well, I'll start like, sometimes I work from photos,
yes.
like this
And I
elephant.
see at the back of the elephant, there's white.
Yeah.
There's white on the tusk. There's white up above in the sky. Is that a last minute needle felting?
Actually, a lot of that I added out on the laying out process.
So it's a big textile with stuff.
Mhm.
Photograph?
And the hard part about wet felting, and I think a lot of people get discouraged doing it, is because it takes a lot of experimentation.
Mm.
Every single fiber acts differently when it's wet felted. Some fibers blend together and the colors combine. Other fibers keep their color. Some combine and then some get wavy. There's a lot of experimentation involved.
So the elephant has white in the sky.
Yeah.
That's a needle felt?
No,
No.
that's mostly wet felted. I think I added some
Wet felt.
detail on with needle felting, but a lot of the white in it, and that's kind of why this was a fun one, is it was based on this photograph,
Yes.
but I was really working on bringing that feeling of hot light, bright light that is in Africa, and getting the feeling of that. A lot of the white is silk.
Silk.
Yeah. And that tends to stay brighter than white merino
And
would.
the tusk.
Mhm.
Silk.
Yeah. And this also, like I like to play around with printed fabrics added in. So this, if you look very closely, there's a lot of fun little prints. There's kind of a glitter circular one here. There's a kind of a metallic print here and another colored print here. Right here, and it's hard to see, but there's actually a map of Africa. And it looks pretty much just like the texture in the ground.
Oh my goodness.
But I know it's there, so that makes me happy.
Wow.
Okay. Another, like, sometimes as far as inspiration, like like Karen, I get lost on Instagram. You know, I must have a file of 1,000 different things on Instagram. And a lot of times, like there is one artist that does some really interesting pieces where they're usually of buildings, and he'll do a door in a really intense, deep color. Like there was one where the door is really deep, brilliant red, and the whole rest of the piece is pastel colored. And I really love those kind of things, and I was trying to figure out how I can do that in a landscape. So I ended up with this, like a red barn. And I was going to do more pastel colors for the rest of the piece, but then I felt it didn't really work as far as going with the setting. So I went with more neutrals.
So this is fiber.
Yes.
So the little in front, all the little fluffy snow covered
Mhm.
things, you know, on the bottom of the piece, up the surface is it's a fiber.
Mhm.
It's just that's how it is.
Yeah.
In that landscape when it's that cold.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And this, like the background, I used like a coarser wool, which kind of gives you more of the feeling of like rain falling in the background and haze. And then in this, there's a lot of flax and embroidery thread for the grass. Although I had to needle felt some of the white snow on the roof because I found that some of the red from the red wool kind of turned the snow on the roof pink. So I had to go back and needle felt some more white on there. But on this one, this was one that was more from my imagination. Like I studied a lot of pictures of water. And then the dog is based loosely on a dog that I used to have. But I was kind of going for an every person's dog. Because I figure if you've owned dogs in the past, there's a good chance that at some point you owned a dog that kind of looked like this, you know, at least from the back. So I wanted you to feel that this could have been a dog you owned. And this was designed as a piece that's a fundraiser for Old Dog Haven. I foster for Old Dog Haven. They're a group, nonprofit group that takes dogs that senior dogs that have been abandoned or left behind by seniors that have passed away or entered homes and they couldn't take their dogs with them. They're all over the age of 8, and most of them have problems that make them considered unadoptable from shades. Yeah. Most of it requires medication, treatment. They're dogs that most people wouldn't want to take. But they take those dogs and they're placed in foster homes where they will stay for the rest of their lives. And then they cover all the medical needs of that dog, all the veterinary treatments, all the medicines. And yeah, everything, Old Dog Haven. And everything from that point is covered by Old Dog Haven, and that's where they get to stay for the rest of their lives. And so my portion of the sale, and it's still available, will go to Old Dog Haven because there's a massive veterinary medication bill when old dogs are concerned. But anyway, like this is mainly from my imagination after studying like photos of water, photos of the moon. Grasses are always really fun to do in fiber because you can use a lot of different fibers, yarns, flax, threads. So a lot of it is experimentation. I have a drawer full of things that didn't quite work out at home. Before you felt it, you can take it apart and rearrange it as much as you want. There's some, like the Dancing on Mount Hood. I must have spent over a month taking that apart and redoing that. Before it's actually felted, you can redo it as much as you want. And sometimes that's a bad thing because you'll just keep doing it and doing it. Once it's felted, it's harder to fix something that you don't like. Although it can be done, like I've added things on, and sometimes I really haven't liked something once it's felted and I've let it sit for a month. And then I come back and think, well, maybe it's not that bad. And once I do something like, especially the machine stitching adds a lot to it, although you can't really see it. I've had some that I didn't really like until I did the machine stitching on it. So sometimes you never know.
How long ago did you start felting, and what was the impetus of that?
I ran across it actually when I was, my family and I, for Christmas, we used to do an experience present where we would sign up the person for a certain activity with us to do after Christmas. And I was looking at needle felting for my daughter and I to do, and I was looking for a class that we could do that, which I didn't find. But I ran across the work of Moy Mackay, who is a fiber artist in Scotland. And her work was amazing, and I was really inspired by it. And so I went out and I bought all the materials, and I was really going to do this. And I started and I did a couple pieces, and then I put it away for the next year because I really wasn't happy with what I got. And after a year, I decided I'd already spent this money, so I'm going to drag it back out, and gave it another go. And I actually signed on for some online classes with Moy, which I think really helped, and got back into it. But I think altogether, it's probably been about 3 years.
What was the Master Gardener program?
Well, a lot of, like I have ADHD, which I'll talk about later, but a lot of people they say they're inspired by this, they're inspired by that. I'm inspired by anything that's in front of me. If I see it, I can be inspired for it. It's harder to pin down an idea long enough to work on it than it is to come up with ideas. Yeah. But since I'm a master gardener, I work with other gardeners where I have that right in front of me all the time. We talk about plants. I look up questions about plants. So it's something that's right in front of me all the time. So it's hard not to be inspired by that.
Yeah, you have the pile and the other pile.
Yep.
And the other pile, you got a lot of piles. And
Yep.
one place that you just work on the pile and then you work on the other pile.
Yep.
You go from pile to pile.
And you don't want to put it away because then it's gone from your world.
Because you don't know what to jettison.
Yeah.
That's a creativity thing.
Yeah.
ADHD.
Yeah. And I think it's something that a lot of artists deal with. There's a lot of good things that come from it. There's also a lot of things that I think hold a lot of artists back. Just being able to start something is difficult, and also being able to finish something is difficult.
Yes.
And a lot of artists get caught up in perfectionism, which is an ADHD thing. It's
Has to be right.
Yeah. And it's not like OCD where you feel like you have to do the same thing over and over. You're compelled to do it. It's more like you have to keep working on this because it has to be perfect. And if it can't be perfect, it's not worth doing it.
Perfect for the vision.
Yeah. I know I've worked in Photoshop a long time, and I've done a lot of composites. And I've spent hours on a certain file trying to remove a color cast from a layer, and finally got it, and I printed it out, and I've shown it to somebody else, and they say, I can't tell the difference between these two.
Right.
And here I spent hours trying to correct that. It's originally, the high school that I went to was kind of a progressive high school, and they gave us the ability to be exposed to a lot of different fields in art. Actually, they changed that right after I left. because I guess it didn't prepare you too well for college. But so I feel blessed that I had that and I could get through school with that, because if I'd been in a traditional school, probably things would have been harder for me. And once I got out of there, I went back and I studied photography. I got a degree in photography, but then I realized that mostly what was open to me was photographing babies from pennies.
And portraiture.
Yeah, and that made me cringe. So I went to the racetrack and I trained racehorses for the next 12 years. And then when I had my kids, I decided I didn't want to travel anymore because that involves a lot of traveling. And so I started a sewing business because my grandmother was a tailor and my aunt taught me to quilt. And so I had a basis in fiber. And after I had my kids, I started a business making horse racing equipment, racing silks and horse equipment for the racetrack, because I already knew all the people there. And then when the racetrack started closing, I went back to college again. And at that point, I was diagnosed with ADHD, mainly because I was taking my daughter in to be diagnosed and realized that
Me too.
yeah, which a lot of adults are running into now.
Yes.
So, where was I? Oh yeah, I went back to school for graphic design. And so I have a degree in graphic design as well. So that kind of, it's, my background is kind of spotty in art, but I feel like I've learned a lot from everything that I've done. And as far as ADHD goes, there's the hyperactive. There's 3 different types. There's hyperactive, and that's what most people are familiar with. They think it's little boys that can't sit still. Yeah, the troublemakers. But what is a lot more common is the inattentive kind. And that is more common in girls. And I think maybe people that are less out there, and it's mostly like you notice daydreaming, it's hard to pay attention. And then there's a combined part. But a lot of times, especially in our generation, that wasn't recognized, the inattentive. Yeah. Because I read Remarkably Bright Creatures. I don't know if anybody's read that book, but one of the moderators in the book is actually the octopus. So I started reading about them, and they're amazingly intelligent, and they have so much personality. There's like one that kept climbing out of his aquarium, and he didn't like a light that was shining above him, so he would squirt it and short it out, which would short out the entire aquarium. And the people at the aquarium would get so upset and keep repairing it, and he would just keep doing it, which I don't know why they didn't think to move that light.
And the one who escaped
Yeah.
the ship, and he went down a hole this big, his whole body went down.
And they like to play with dog toys.
Yeah.
And the one that kept shorting out the light used to juggle crabs. And there's they would sometimes climb out of their aquarium at night, go into another aquarium, eat the fish there, and then go back to their aquarium before anybody realized that they were gone.
I think there should be a videotape of you that goes with each of these pieces that you sell, because people have no idea. No idea what labor of love is. Yeah. Because why is your capital C and small d?
Actually, well, one reason is I'm not good at marketing, so I created an alter ego. that goes by C.D. But the reason the D is lowercase is I sign my name in stitching in every piece. And if you're writing it with a sewing machine, you actually have to pick up your needle to start a capital D, which is a pain. So, so I do a capital C, lowercase d, and then a capital M, and then you can do it all in one stitch without ever picking up your needle. So.
You never get an answer like that.
Right. That's a true sewing, expert. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming.